We are not done with the career story yet of Chet Davis. I thought we'd wrap it up. I thought I had you studied like a book, Chet Davis. I was far from that. We had to make this a 2-part episode. So we've covered, and if you've missed it, by the way, go back and listen to part 1. The stories of growing up on a thoroughbred farm and skipping citrus TV at new house and living in a one-room spot in Eureka, California. That's where he left off the story. You're enjoying your time in California as a small-town kid covering high school sports, but you head to Louisiana for your next gig. Take us through that, how you ended up finding out that opportunity. I would say Lafayette, but you're going to scold me here in a second because that's not how you say the city in Louisiana you ended up in.
Yeah, we have that Lafayette in New York. No, this is Lafayette. Like you're laughing at somebody. Yeah, so that popped up. As everyone knows, and this is kind of a little sidebar, contracts in this industry, the whole thing needs to be destroyed. The fact that what we were getting paid at entry-level positions to deal with contracts. I was fortunate enough that my first job was it was a 2-year contract, but after a year, you could leave for a job that was higher. If it was a higher market jump out of, it was the only station there, so they didn't have to worry about competition. So essentially, if you were leaving to go somewhere bigger and better, you're free, which that's a great way to do it. It gives you the motivation to, work on your reel, and they understand that this is entry level, that most people are not going to stay. Not every station's like that. And so it all just comes down to timing, which can be so unfortunate or it can work in your favor at when your contract's going to end, what jobs are opening, how that all goes. But so, as the search was going on, not a lot of things. Like that first job, I was like, I'll go anywhere. Second job, you're trying to figure out, is this a place that I want to be at and set up shop a little bit longer? Do I want to be closer to home? What kind of events am I going to be covering? All those questions start, funneling in. And so the Lafayette job, I'm like, okay, I've heard about Louisiana football. And, in the description, it talks about you're going to be covering LSU football. Doesn't get much bigger than that. You're going to be covering the Saints, all those things. I'm like, okay, that sounds pretty cool to me. And then the way I got my foot in the door was Syracuse. The sports director at that station was a Syracuse grad. His name's Travis Webb. And so when I applied like you normally do, I forget who owned that company, but it wasn't one of the major ones, but still one of those application websites. But then I fired off a separate email. I looked up, everyone should do this. You don't want to bombard somebody with emails, but do your research, see who's on that. Every job that I ever applied to, I checked the news team and looked for Syracuse. Is there a familiar face, maybe somebody I know, or is there just that familiarity of it's an alumni? It's somebody that I could reach out to and try to get more information. What is the news director looking for? What's the station looking for? Do you like it here? All those things. You can get some great insight that can help you in an interview or help you realize, do I actually want to be at the station?
Yeah.
But so when I saw that he was a sports director, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to send this guy an email. And that's basically why I got the job. He sent me later into the process. He was like, he literally said, you know what, you're a Syracuse guy, let's go for it. And I was like, awesome, okay, here we go. And so I made another road trip. Another friend came out for that road trip from California to southeastern Louisiana. And that was stop number 2. And this is, you thought the first story was crazy. This was way worse. So same thing, but this time I actually did have a roommate lined up. The meteorologist needed a roommate, but he was stuck on his lease for 1 more month. So I had to find a place to stay for a month. I go back to my good old friend, Craig.
Oh, no.
Hop on Craigslist. And I found a perfect one that was like, it's a month to month. I'm like, that's exactly what I'm looking for. It seemed like a nice house. I'm like, this could work. I could do this for a month. So I drive in, this guy, I'm only 23 at the time. This guy's younger than me. He looks like he's 18, but I guess he's 21. Place reeks of marijuana, whatever. I can make that work. Hope I don't fail my drug test at the station because of this. But the guy, unfortunately, on a somber note, my grandfather had passed away.
Oh.
Yeah, and so, but it was one of those, it was time kind of thing. So it wasn't a shock, but it was still, I had to go back home for the funeral. And so my whole life was in my car again, and I had a plane to catch in the next 18 hours. So I had to find a place to stay, a place to park my car so that I could get to the airport and take off kind of thing. And so I go in, I'm kind of scrambled to find a place, and I find this guy who seems like he's legit, whatever. So I'm like, you know what, this works for me, man. I can make this work. Same situation. I got a room in this guy's house, shared kitchen, whatever. And I'm like, is there a contract that I could sign? And he goes, a contract? And he was super Southern. And I'm like, yeah, like an agreement. And he goes, oh, yeah. He opens up a drawer, takes out a plain white piece of paper, and goes, he literally starts making a contract. He goes, what's your name? I'm like, Chet Davis.
Chet? Did you say Chet?
How do you spell Chet? Chet? And so he writes his name, and then he writes a line for me to sign. He goes, here you go. I signed it, and I go, do you want a copy? He goes, nah, I'm good. I'm like, this is great. And I literally dumped. I didn't put any like the valuables in the house, but I like put all my clothes into this room. I left all like the electronics in my car, but and I drove away. And I like looked in my rearview mirror, and I'm like, I'm gonna come back, and there's gonna be a different owner in this house, and no one's gonna know who the heck I am. But I left all my stuff there, and then I lived with that guy and his girlfriend and their cat, who loved to sneak into the bathroom when I was showering. That was great. Yeah, the thing you do when you move to a place where you don't know anybody.
So you enjoyed your month with Bobby Boucher, which was nice, and the grown version of Mr. Boucher in the late 2010 decade. And there, sure enough, you do get to move out of that place, thankfully, and move in with a meteorologist who maybe made you sign a contract like that. But nonetheless, for the sake of the order of these conversations, because you're soon to be married later this year, let's talk about how you met your now fiance before we get to the responsibilities. So Cam doesn't get mad at me to rank the importance of these questions. Let's start with her first. How did you meet your now fiance, soon to be wife?
Yes. Well, I was convinced that when I moved to the South, I was going to find my Southern belle. And I don't know if I accomplished that or not, because she is a piece of work. No, she's fantastic. We actually met through so at this shop, it was a 3-person sports team. So the sports director, Travis, who I mentioned, and I was the weekend. And then we had a sports reporter, Molly. Molly and I immediately hit it off. She's a Texas girl, became great friends. But she had an apartment situation where she was actually living with, it was a combination of like college students, because the University of Louisiana is right there. And, again, it was just kind of like a random array of people that were like later on either postgraduate degrees or seniors in college kind of thing. And Cameron randomly became one of her roommates. Not right away. So there was like a different set of roommates that I became friends with, and then she was like a replacement roommate. And so I had heard her name for a while. And Molly had been like, oh man, this Cameron girl, you got to meet her. I'm like, well, this is up to you. Like, you got to set this up. And so she actually met me for the first time at a media basketball game. Yep.
Oh.
One of my buddies at another station was a big avid, we would play basketball at the gym together. And he was like, yo, we should get my station versus your station. So we did this basketball game at a local high school, and she showed up with Molly. And so that was the first time we met. She claims that she immediately knew that I was the one. I don't know if it was the sweet jump shot or me bricking some layups that she was like, that's the guy I want to marry. Yeah, with my baggy basketball Jordan shorts, wherever that guy was wearing. And so, we hit it off after that. And it was actually crazy because another one of those contract situations, I met her later into my contract. So we'd only been dating for 6 months when the Albany job came up. And we had to have that conversation way sooner than most relationships would of, you want to move across the country, that kind of thing. And I was under the assumption that she wouldn't come, because a lot of those places in the South, you don't leave. You build a house next to your parents, and you just, the generational, the street name is your last name kind of thing.
Right.
And so, but she's one of those rare ones where she's like, no, I'm out of here. She's like, if I hadn't met you, I was going to be leaving. But she's like, she hadn't been north of Arkansas. And so I was like, oh, you are in for a rude awakening. But she's a nurse. And so she landed a job up here before I did. I was applying for jobs, actually right when Doug Sherman had left CBS.
Yes. Chet, I don't want to give away the Albany story quite yet, because I want to go back to something that happened there in Lafayette. I think I nailed it that time. Well, you mentioned that some of the teams that you were covering weren't the high school players you covered were just as impressive. In particular, one that plays for the Jacksonville Jaguars that really stood out to you.
Best player I've ever seen in person, Travis. So weird thing about this, and I will never get over it. I want to see him on camera pronounce his name. When we covered him, he was Travis Etienne. Now people know him by Travis Etienne, the running back out of Clemson. But he was just the definition of a human highlight reel. And so how it works, anyone that's ever worked in local TV and covered sports, Friday Night Football is the end-all, be-all. It's your biggest show of the year in most cases. And so and this is also a funny part, when I'm coming from Eureka, there was 9 high schools in our viewing area. 5 big schools, 4 little schools. And that's literally the big 5 and the little 4. That's how they called it. I get to Louisiana, and there's around 55 high schools in our viewing area. Yeah. And I remember because I showed up in the summer, and then, one of the first big things, we started doing a big preview tour. And I asked my sports director, I'm like, how many games do we cover? We pick like the games of the week, or how do we do that? And he goes, we cover about all of them. I'm like, all of them? And he's like, dude, it's the 3 of us. We get 4 photogs that work overtime, and we each get like 3 or 4 games. And I'm like, holy mackerel. So whenever you had to get that, so Travis Etienne is from Jennings. Whenever you get that Jennings game, you go there first because Travis is scoring an 80-yard touchdown. You get your highlight, and you're like, I'm moving out, going to the next game. But no, he was so awesome. And it was, talk about an eye-opening experience. Even before I saw Travis play, we did this. It was called like the Super 16, where we highlighted the best 16 football players in the area. And talking to these athletes, man, being from upstate New York, you kind of get that chip on your shoulder of like, man, how come we didn't get recruited? We could play football. No. I think I could have played at that level, but I only would have played. I would not have been an all-star. Like, these guys were literally cut from a different cloth. Like, these guys were you'd ask them a question of, what's your 40 time? 4.4? I'm like, I said 40 time. You're running a 4.4. Jesus. Like, and this kid, 6'3", 200 pounds. And I'm just like, talk about unbelievable specimens that these kids are. And so that was just so cool for me as someone who loves football to be able to see these guys move on in their careers and be like, I remember when he was only a freshman in high school. And so that's been a lot of fun. And it's also, basketball and baseball. They just produce a ton of athletes down there. And so that's been really cool to follow those along.
Just my map too. You did go to Death Valley to LSU? You've covered games in Death Valley?
Yeah. So
what's that experience like? Yeah. What's that like for a night game, man?
To this day, LSU Alabama is number 1. That's the best event I've ever covered in person. We would shoot the games. We would shoot the games ourselves. What a crazy, even just the first time I went to one of those games.
Chet, sorry, real quick. Is that the year they're both undefeated, 1 and 2 in the country?
No, it wasn't 1-2.
I believe that was fall of 2011. Okay, so yeah, it's probably a little bit after, yeah.
No. So this was Jalen Hurts' freshman year.
Okay.
So now, and that was, this LSU team was stacked. That's Jamal Adams was on the team. We're talking Leonard Fournette. I believe the quarterback that year was either Anthony Jennings or Brandon Harris, which that was a big reason why that team did not go very far. Sorry, guys. But they were absolutely stacked with athletes and great players. But so, covering those games, it's probably about an hour drive from Lafayette to Baton Rouge. And the first time I go, I show up. I was the first one there because I was just like, I don't know where I'm going. That's one of the big stresses for me also in this industry is whenever I travel to a new stadium. Like, whenever you have to do that, and it's a credential process, and you're also, in a lot of cases, one-man banding those events, so you're carrying a ton of gear. Some people bring wagons, and they're the smart ones. I'm the idiot who's got the tripod on a shoulder, camera on the other shoulder, and I'm carrying it's just a nightmare stuff to carry. And especially in Louisiana heat, brother. I am disgusting. I had to bring multiple shirts to some of these events because I was like, I'm going to sweat through the first one. But that LSU Alabama, I'd never experienced anything like it. The noise, it's one of those things where the noise was so loud it went deaf. Like, it was just like a humming. Your ears could not handle how loud it was. And I remember that game, which Alabama ended up blowing the doors off. But in that first half, they intercepted Jalen Hurts. LSU did. And that place, that's what I'm talking about with the noise. You could feel it like throughout your whole body. You could just feel it was unbelievable. One of the greatest experiences I've ever had. So I absolutely loved going to Death Valley. And then and that's where you hear about the hospitality too. Even before the game, you're walking around and people are offering you gumbo and beer. I'm like, I'm working, I can't do that, but give me the gumbo. And like, just like they act like they've known you forever and they have no idea who you are. So that was always a really cool experience to go out there. Those were the Les Miles days. So those press conferences were always a treat, and absolutely loved it.
The Mad Hatter doing his thing there down in the bayou, having a lot of fun doing that. Now, you already teased us here about the trip back to New York to the capital region. Before you tell your side of the story, I don't know if I may have ever told you this before, but it's bizarre because you already said that Doug Sherman, the legendary broadcaster here, shout out to him, he is leaving, and CBS6 is looking for his replacement. But at that point, it is Brittany Devane at that point. Now Brittany McHatton, who's out in Maine. Jason Lewis, who I believe is out in the Michigan area doing his thing. And at that point, I'm doing the Upstate Sports Edge still on Tuesdays with Brittany. So I would get there early, and when they were looking for someone to replace Doug, and I think at that point, Brittany was in the sports director. Jason's contract was going to expire. He was going to go to Michigan. So like, she was showing me tape of who was soon to be the replacement. So she was going through people that they were thinking about. And I remember, Chet, watching your tape. She goes, hey, we got this guy from Louisiana who might get the job. Now, again, me being an upstate New York kid, I hear we got a kid from Louisiana. I'm like, yeah, it's not going to work. Like, look, like Louisiana and upstate New York, like those are two different worlds. Right. So I'm watching your tape and I'm like, I'll use the Bobby Boucher reference again. Like, I expected you to have like a Cajun accent and like just to have this like big Southern drawl. And I'm waiting for it. I'm like, and I think I actually turned to Brittany and said, Brittany, I don't think he's from Louisiana. She's like, oh, no, he's from Syracuse. I think he's from like New York too. I think she said Oneonta, which is another area in upstate New York, not Untitled. So I'm like, wait a second. This kid's from New York. This is not. So Chet, I remember watching your tape, and I'm going to ask this a little later in the interview. I don't know what I was looking at. Like, I'm a radio guy watching TV tape. I really don't know. But take us through your process. Like, you obviously sent tape. Were you confident you were going to land it? Was it just getting back to New York? Take us through why you wanted to get back to the Empire State.
So this was another one of those. I go back to how much I hate contracts where, my contract was up, I believe, in the early summer months, maybe May or June. And so you start looking, you never want to start too early, because if you find that perfect job, you're going to get into a hairy situation where you're going to be either breaking contract or negotiating your way out, and it just sucks. So when I got to like the new year, I was like, okay, let's start. You save stuff throughout, it's funny, like the stuff that you thought was good a year ago is now very old and outdated, and you think it stinks. So like you're constantly updating with like, oh, I really like, how I anchored that, or I really like this, the packages always stand out as like, this is my big story. I know I want to put that on my reel. And so I started putting it all together, and the Albany thing, and no joke, was day one. I opened up, you go to tvjobs.com is the time I was using, and the Albany sports director job is there. And I'd always wanted to be a sports director because, to be honest with you, I was just sick of working on the weekends. You do a lot, you sacrifice so much, you miss so many things. That I was like, great, it's back in my, familiar neck of the woods. One of my best friends growing up lives there. I get to be a sports director. This sounds great. Moving up markets. So I applied for that job, and Chris Gegg was the news director at the time. And I one of those, like, I sent it off, and sometimes you'll send things off and you won't hear things for weeks. Like, it'll just be radio silence. Sometimes a lot of times you never hear it all. But Chris Gegg called me like literally a few hours later. And I was at the gym in Louisiana, and I'm like, hello? Like, Albany popped up. I'm like, that was way too quick. But it was him. And he said he loved my stuff and he wanted to do an interview. And it was one of those things that now knowing what I know, I was never really in the running for sports director, even though that's what it was labeled as, because they hadn't officially named Brittany sports director yet.
And you know what, Chet, just stop you there. I think we also got to mention Kelly O'Donnell's in this mix too. He's a Syracuse guy. He is also involved in this situation, and Kelly's now moved on to Siena, but there is a Kelly-Doug situation that takes place where Kelly decides, I'm not staying at CBS6 either. I'm going to Siena. So that's why I believe that sports director job was open, because, like you just said, Kelly had said no and moved on, and they hadn't officially announced Brittany. So for that perspective, needed to be added there.
And like equal opportunity, right? Because like you have to post that job and give people a chance to apply. Even if you're going to hire within, you still have to, by state law, post it. So I didn't know at the time that Brittany or Jason, one of those two, were likely going to get the job. And so I was essentially applying for one of their jobs, which I was not as keen about, because when later in that process, Chris let me know that they were going in-house, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. Chris was a new news director, and I don't know if you want to ruffle that many feathers on day one kind of thing. But Chris Gegg came back and he was going to offer me the number 3. And I was like, oof, I really like anchoring. So as number 3, people who don't know, and that's like, you're a fill-in anchor, you're the reporter, you do a lot of packages. Some people love that. Some people love doing just storytelling. Some people like doing a mixture of both, and that's kind of what a weekend anchor is. And so I was like, no, that's not really what I'm looking for. So thank you, but no thank you. Come to find out that Jason Lewis then turned down, once Brittany got named sports director, Jason's contract was also ending, and he goes, I want to be, go somewhere else. So he goes to Flint, Michigan, I believe. And so that's where then now the number 2 job is open. And now I'm back in the mix. And so Chris Gegg gave me a call back. And I think that at this point we're now in April. And I felt like they actually flew me in. This was the first time in my career that I got flown in for an interview, which, no offense to Chris Gegg or the station, was a complete waste of time. It was more, I guess, standard procedure, because they told me to wear a suit because they wanted me to do, like trial anchoring. They wanted to see me I didn't even do it. I wore a suit all day. I wore a suit in a plane. Who wears a suit in a plane? And so I get there, and I basically shadow Brittany for the day, and I kind of see how everything runs and the chaos that was Upstate Sports Edge, because that should not be run by 2 people. That was just such a difficult time for them. But yeah, I flew up for the day, and I got to meet everybody, and then the ball kept rolling, and I accepted the job, and before I knew it, I was in Albany.
Look at that, man. And you know what? You took one of my questions, by the way. I'm going to have these nice fancy graphics in the bottom, by the way, towards the end. But you said something that is worth repeating, because you said it kind of in passing. The Upstate Sports Edge there that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Why is that such a bear? For those who don't understand the perspective you just offered, for 2 people, why is what that, let's go this first. What was that show, for those who don't know, and why was it such a bear to prep daily?
So yeah, this was created before my time. This is when CBS6 had a 4-person team. So we've mentioned all the characters. You have Doug Sherman, you have Kelly O'Donnell, an absolute wealth of knowledge between the 2 of them. I think at the end of the line, we're talking almost 3 decades of anchoring experience in the capital region. And then you have Jason and Brittany. So you have 4 people, and that's a lot of content that can be churned. And so what they decided to do, because our sister station is the CW15. So you have the normal CBS6 broadcast, but we also have this partnership with the CW. And so on that hour block that we have, 10 to 10:30 would be regular newscasts, and then 10:30 to 11, they dedicated to sports, which it seems like a great idea. Hey, more content for us. We're getting to do more stories, some more of that in-depth reporting. And I never really got to be a part of that. I've seen some of the work that was created, and it was fantastic. It was basically Kelly O'Donnell's baby, and he kind of had Brittany and Jason running around doing a lot of the, I don't want to say the heavy lifting, but going to different places and getting content, and Kelly put it all together and anchor it. But with Kelly and Doug out of the picture, you now have Jason and Brittany by themselves. That I don't know how they ever turned that content, because the Upstate Sports Edge is supposed to be fully local, 30-minute show. So that's about 22 and a half minutes of content that you're trying to do all local. And that is on top of your normal duties of covering, a 3.5-minute sports block, or I guess it was actually back then, it was 4 minutes in the earlies, 2 separate minute blocks, and then, 3.5 minutes at 11. It's insane. I think back, it's actually been a few years now. So when I arrived as the sports anchor, there was an overlap where Jason was still there for a little while. And so it was the 3 of us. And it was without a doubt the craziest work experience in my career. I mean, I'm talking about, I had to jump down staircases while doing my tie because you're running at the last second. I mean, editing, it was every single night. At the end of the day, you were exhausted and you don't know how you did it. And you're just throwing it together. You're doing these super long interviews. And I got to a point where I had to call former mentors and be like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Like, it is, because you don't want to water down the content, and you take pride in what you're doing. But because you do that, that takes a lot of time. And that's like supposed to be a lot of manpower. And we're also talking about 3 people who don't have that wealth of knowledge that Doug and Casey had, and the connections. That's another part of it. Like, all those things were missing. And so then when Jason leaves, and then we hire Gardner, who's now still working at CBS6, it was the three of us. And I think we probably did it for one more year before they finally decided, enough's enough. And you would think that when they told us, they brought us in, like, hey, we're not going to do the Upstate Sports Edge. I think they were thinking we were going to be upset, like sad. We all high-fived. We were like, thank God, dude. Because it was so brutal. It was a great learning experience. Like, we literally tested the limits of what we could handle, emotionally, like physically, everything. And then everything after that seemed easy, because you're doing less, but you're doing better product.
Yeah, and I'll stay away from how financially it may have or may not have benefited all of you during that extra work. I'll just avoid that question, but I will offer this to you, again, for perspective purposes and for students listening and other. Can you name any other markets, and I'm talking through like the top 60 who took on that type of bear? Wasn't that just unique to Albany, where people just avoid that? I don't care if you're in Boston, Philly, New York. Nobody, maybe I'm wrong, Chet. I don't know any other markets who are taking on what you guys were taking.
Not on the daily basis like that. I have not really encountered. There's like you see a lot of those NFL Sunday. I know Wham does some great stuff with Buffalo Plus in Rochester. But a lot of those professional cities, they do the 30-minute pregame shows. But that's a once a week kind of thing. And maybe they do it twice a week where they do a pre and a post or something like that. But when you're doing it every day, year round, those summer months. Thank God for Saratoga that we could fill some stuff. But there's still that, the dead part of summer where you're like, what the heck are we going to talk about? And you had to get creative. I actually had you on once where we did a blind tasting of coffee, and I didn't find out. We were trying to figure out the difference between cold brew and regular iced coffee. I didn't find out till in the interview you don't drink coffee. Talk about horrendous content. I don't know what we were doing, but we had fun with it. And we had to have fun with it.
Yeah, I believe that's the first hit I ever did with you. I think that's like how I met you, and I'm like, I'm not going to tell the guy first day I don't drink coffee. I don't want to blow up his segment here, which, by the way, you'll be happy to know now with baby Rex here, I do drink coffee. I'm a changed man. I have no choice at this point in my life. I'm getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right. We are going to talk about your current employer. So for those who listen to the podcast, this is the part where I can say the things like, because you work for this company, you can answer as much or as little as you'd like, so you don't get a nasty email from the boss. I'll just ask this. Brittany does leave. She goes to Maine. Tell us as much as possible about that transition of the sports director opening, then coming, and how you landed in that position. Go ahead with what you want to tell us, the inside behind CBS6.
Let me take a sip of my water so I can think this through.
Yeah, pause for dramatic effect. This is where I do a nice live read for you sponsors out there.
This was, and so many people that were under contracts that were expiring, the pandemic hits. And that was, so Brittany leaves. This is 2020. She leaves in January. She got married, and her husband lived in Maine. So she went to go be up there. She still works in TV, but more like, I think, a morning news anchor is what she's doing. And so it seemed like, this is where it gets really tough in your career, because it's not just your career. And if you are with someone, and I wasn't engaged at the time, but we knew where that was kind of going, you're not making a selfish decision anymore. You're supposed to be making a decision for two if you're in a relationship. So that's where it was really tough it was very much a life decision as well as a career decision. Where earlier on, I knew that Eureka was temporary. I knew that Lafayette was temporary. This was the first time in my career where I'm kind of back home. I'm still close to family. I have all my family that lives in Unadilla or in the Boston area. So I'm right in the middle. And we love the capital region. We love the location, ventures up north, go to the city down south. And so I had to do a juggling act, or, try to find what were the pros and cons, was filled on both sides of whether to stay or to go. And then the pandemic kind of made the decision for me. It was, do you test the waters, or do you take a great opportunity to finally become a sports director? And so that was tough, because you didn't really even get a chance to see what other opportunities were out there. Because when the pandemic hit and the sports world shut down, not a great time to be a sports anchor looking for a job. And so that kind of made the decision a lot easier. but it's also in the back of your mind, the shoulda, coulda, woulda, what could have been out there. And I had a lot of friends who were in the same situation, who maybe didn't have the promotion on the table and they didn't know what to do. And don't even get me started on the college kids that were coming out that at the end of that spring semester. No one has ever had to experience that. Trying to find a job when jobs aren't hiring and there aren't sports going on. I really can't imagine what that would have been like. So it kind of, again, that my fate was kind of determined by the pandemic, and it's worked out. Gardner and I have, we crushed it for that year. We were doing, news stories. We were going to The Great Escape. We were doing, all sorts of different stuff to try and provide content for the station. And thank God sports are back now. But yeah, it was definitely a roller coaster trying to figure that out. It was unpredictable. And yeah, again, happy to be a sports director in Albany.
I asked one of your former colleagues, now he's left the market, Michael Barther, worked at ABC 10, this same question. During that
on before me, gosh,
he was leaving. It was like his swan song, his retirement. I'm gonna get so much grief for it. Anyways, the COVID effect. Did you have a fear, and you can answer this for Gardner if you want. Maybe I'll put him on in a few months too. Did you have a fear that it was going to really affect that entire setting that was television highlights and anchoring and everything else? Because as you mentioned, like, if there's no sports, there's got to be a fear of, like, are they reconsidering how this whole process is set up? Because it's different when you and I grew up in the 90s with Sports Center and everything else.
100%. And I can remember when that NBA shutdown happened, that following Monday, I remember coming in and I'd had like this whole game plan ready of like, all right, sports are shut down, but we can still have content. Probably not every day, but maybe I'll do like anchoring every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I came into my news director's office and she looked at me and she goes, Chet, you're not even, like, we're kicking you out of the station. You guys are going to work in the Albany bureau in downtown. And I was like blindsided. I was like, that was the moment where I was like, okay, this is going to be really serious. Like, I knew when the NBA thing happened, we all realized this is serious. But I guess I didn't realize how it was going to immediately impact our routine. Like, this is going to be completely different. And so we were essentially, on our own, like Gardner and I talk about a bubble. I mean, we were with each other every single day trying to find ways to provide content. And a lot of times it was determined for us because if there were no sports going on, we did a few of those immediate stories with athletes whose seasons had just come to an end. But how many times can you tell that story? It became very repetitive. And so we started doing these news stories. And so, like, I literally drove the station car because I didn't go back to this. My car was parked at the station for months. And I just drove the station car and we would edit at the bureau, which is this little office in downtown Albany. And there was one other reporter crew there. But Gardner and I was crazy. No prompter anymore. So I had to memorize my scripts and we would film everything ahead of time and put it together. But man, talk about, and then the age of Zoom, like for a profession that's so dedicated to quality and making sure everything's HD and lit correctly and in focus, everything we were trained to do, we have now just completely lowered our standard because having the content is more important than the quality. And I don't think that's going to change. I really don't. I think that the Zoom is going to stay because what it made us realize is we have so much more access than we thought we did. Like, we couldn't interview someone unless they were here. No, we can interview anyone. We can interview Nick Wisdowski as he's training for the Olympics while he's in North Carolina. We don't have to wait for him to come back to Dwaynesburg for a camp. And so it just kind of like changed our whole mindset of like, and it's still happening where it's like someone breaks a record or, throws a perfect game. I can text the coach and be like, hey, can I get a Zoom real quick? Boom, I had content just like that, where a year and a half ago, I would have said, oh, shucks, I'll put a picture up. And I love that. I think it's absolutely going to improve how we're able to do some storytelling. And we're still going to do the high, HD stuff. But the age of Zoom, I think, is definitely going to be here to stay.
We're doing it right now. We're using a different software than Zoom. You're not sitting in my living room / office. We're not watching Tyson Fury. Yeah.
Oh, who's won the fight? Has that happened yet?
That is not. The next time Fury and Wilder fight, you, Kyle, and the rest of the crew come back to the place, and we'll do a third podcast potentially might be a little bit dirtier. Yeah.
Will be posted tomorrow. Who's your pick for the fight tonight?
I'm gonna take Floyd. I would take Floyd, and if I'll edit that out if he loses, by the way, and just put in if Paul beat him.
I think he's gonna win. There's no way he's gonna knock him out, though, right?
No chance. No chance. Kyle's out of his mind.
Floyd doesn't knock out anyone.
By the way, for the Kyle we're referencing, if you haven't listened to the WTF podcast, we talk fantasy podcast now on Godzilla Media. So make sure to check that. There's our plug right there. For more information on Godzilla Media, head over to our video assigned on YouTube. And the episode is out. A new episode, more fresh episodes will be coming out this summer and fall with more fantasy news on the way. I got a few more questions for you because you mentioned tape and stuff. I think that is interesting for some broadcasters. But before we get to the tape question, we have not mentioned the potential college football of Chet. You teased it in part one because you did get recruited. Even though you're a small school athlete, even though you despise Bishop Ludden from my hometown in Syracuse, in the west end of Syracuse, you almost had the opportunity, Chet, to play college football, but you decided Syracuse broadcasting was the path. Take us through a little bit of your recruitment that almost was.
Oh, man. I was this close, dude. I was a couple of my high school buddies. We'd all been recruited to go play at Ithaca, and a couple of our older friends were already on the team. And that's also a great communication school, the Park School. And so, dude, it was like I had applied probably to 6 or 7 schools, and I'd heard back from all of them except for Syracuse. And I'd been kind of warned, like, hey, Newhouse is really competitive. You're from a small school. Like, my grades were great. Salutatorian, no big deal. I had like a class of 3. No, I'm kidding, but not kidding that. I was not convinced that I was going to get in, but I still had to wait. And so I had this I feel so bad for this recruiting coach who, God bless him, he called me easily every other day just for like looking for an update. And I was like, hey, coach, still waiting to hear back from Syracuse. But I think I'm coming, man. I think I'm coming to Ithaca. I really want to play for you guys. I want to be a Bomber. And then sure enough, at the final hour, I got my acceptance letter to Syracuse. And I was like, oh, no, I got to call coach. Because once I got the acceptance letter from the limited research I had done, it was like I have to go. If I want to be a sports broadcaster, Syracuse is the place for me. And so it was still a tough decision because, again, a lot of my friends, and we kind of already talked about it, like, hey, we're going to go play there. And people that don't know Ithaca football, they treat it like D1. Like, it's one of those programs, same with Hobart. Like, yeah, sure, it's got the D3 attached to it, but they treat that like the D1 level and play good quality football. Cortaca, if you've ever been to Cortaca, it's the best ever. Which I got to enjoy Cortaca just on the fan side. But, no, it was close, man. I would have been a tight end for Ithaca. Would have had a lot of fun. But once I got that acceptance to Syracuse, I was like, that's where I have to be. And for a couple years, I considered being a walk-on at Syracuse. But again, I think the commitment level, if you're the starting quarterback or if you're the 7th-string quarterback, if there's a commitment level there that I think it would have taken away from the experience of college, and then also maybe some of my broadcasting. That would have been a little awkward if, I'm on the football team and also reporting on the football team kind of thing. So, yeah.
You would have been like my buddy Mike Accione, who you've met before and had a few beers with. They could have, who knows, another upstate New York kid might have caught a touchdown in the end zone as a walk-on. It's all weird how that all comes together.
Could have been.
We mentioned tape, although I'd love to see a Chet Davis high school highlight tape. I'm not talking about your high school highlights. I'm talking about your actual tape you would send to news stations and sports directors, because you nailed it twice. You nailed it with the tape out of college. You nailed it out of Eureka. You got the job in Albany. Besides your wonderful good looks and hair, what else would you give advice to students who are trying to set out the tape that this is what they're looking for on a tape when you're applying for a job?
Guys, I don't know if you can tell, but my hair is receding very fast. So it's not going to be beautiful for very long.
You and both of us. I keep blaming the barber. Like, what are you doing? Why do you keep taking so much? Oh, it's not your fault. Okay.
Dude, I am so ready to be bald. Quick side. The second it becomes silly looking, I'm just buzzing the whole thing.
I think, no, Chet, no. You don't go bald. What you do is you just get a really bad toupee. Like, go Kevin from The Office and be like, what? No, this has been my hair for all these years. I'll prove it to you.
No, I'm going to bring the beard back, and then I'm going to be a completely different person. I'm going to get locked out of the station. What do I look for a tape, or what do I try to put
What do you think if someone's applying for a job, the hiring people, whoever they may be, maybe it's someone in your position who's a sports director, what do you think is the universal, okay, if I see this, and this, it's going to improve your chances to land that job?
Probably the biggest thing for me would be creativity. Like I think a lot of tapes that I see are very cookie cutter, and I mean just like the same kind of stand up over and over. And you want to be memorable. You want to be memorable, but you don't want to be a fool. And I had a professor. I guess I didn't pay attention enough, but he had a great way. He called it like the circus rule. Like don't act like you're in the circus, but also try to think outside the box. And that was some of the best advice I got. I'm gonna give a shout out to Bob Ballou, who's a sports director in Austin, Texas. And he gave me this advice where it really helped, where I sent him some of my stuff, and he's like, Chet, make yourself more uncomfortable. I want you to every time you put on a show, how can you make it different? How can you do something? And sometimes you're gonna miss. Like you're gonna do it, and you're like, I don't think that was how I thought it was going to go. Let me see if I can do it a different way. And before you know it, you're becoming more comfortable with those, and it doesn't come across as a circus. It comes across as creative. And so I know news directors love when you do fancy stand-ups where you're able to think. And I did some where I was standing in one place and I was standing in another. I walked off screen into another. There's a lot of ways, and you can easily Google creative stand-ups and get some ideas, and I guess kind of steal some ideas. So that would be the first thing. The second thing, they do love, I think what got me that job in Albany was one of my packages. And so just your ability to tell a story. And that also combines with probably part 3 of it is, showing your ability to shoot your own stuff. And that's where you can show off in a package with your ability to get different angles and different shots, because especially when you're starting out on the sports side of things, you're going to be shooting a lot of highlights and you're going to be shooting a lot of packages. And a sports director wants to know your ability behind a camera. Are you going to be shaky? Are you going to, not really understand angles and all those things that add up? So those are probably the big things is making sure you're creative, making sure your stuff in your packages is clean and crisp and you're writing your best. And that'll separate you from the rest.
That is very good advice. And the podcast, of course, is getting there with Gaz. And we close with this. The best advice for someone listening, whether they're starting their broadcast career, they want to follow in the footsteps of Chet Davis, landed at CBS6.
My footsteps.
The best advice you can offer. You gave us a good tech answer there, but anything else you'd like to add to that of how you can land at the certain spot you are right now in your career?
Man, that is a loaded question, because I think I know we are. Times are changing. It's different. And a lot of the paths that people, I feel like I'm getting a lot older, but the way that I did my career is not probably the way that a lot of people are going to do it. And that's also the cool thing is a lot of people that have been successful have had unique ways of doing it. You don't have to do it the same way. There are different paths you can take. But I think doing what you're doing right now is one of the new things that's just becoming so much more popular and get you some great exposure and introduce you, build your network, is if you want to go out and do a podcast or find your niche, find something that you're super passionate about. Because when you're doing local news, yeah, you can have passions and you can be like, oh, I love football, I love hockey. But you're also going to have to cover a lot of those other things. And that's great. It's going to expand your knowledge. But when you're able to do a podcast, you control the show. You control what you want to talk about. And that niche could be your big break. So find a niche that you think is going to be valuable, that people are going to want to listen and want to learn from you. And then go for it, man. Get as many guests as you can on the show. Introduce yourself to a lot of people. And then hope for the best.
Wonderful advice, my friend. I kept you far longer than I ever imagined because some of the stories you laid on us and the advice and the journey was far different than I even remembered, learned, listened. All those things happened in this 2-part episode. Did I miss anything? I feel like I've asked you all these questions. I did my best to follow. Are you mad I didn't have you speak Arabic? Are you mad I didn't talk more about the fiance? Did I miss anything?
Alhamdulillah. Ismi Chet. There you go. I gotta say, I gotta praise Allah. My name is Chet.
Great job. Make sure to be on the lookout. Yes, go ahead.
A lot of fun. What's that?
Good. No, I thought you were talking more Arabic there for a second. I was about to start editing.
I have one of those like short-term memories where like the way I study for things, I cram and then it's just gone. So yeah, a lot of the stuff I learned in Arabic completely gone.
More episodes on the way. You'll hear Chet Davis. He is with Godzilla Media. We talk fantasy. Be on the lookout for some of those episodes, along with Kyle Ray, our friend. Like I said, who knows? The next time Tyson Fury has a fight, you might see Chet, me, and Kyle just live streaming on the Godzilla Media YouTube page with, let's say, sobriety being tested with some of the drinks we'd have. Chet, thank you so much, my friend, for doing this. This was so much fun. Even as pals that we are, I got to learn more about your career, which is really cool. And we'll be talking again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.